Hey everyone, welcome back. After a brief hiatus, we're diving into some more enlightening conversations that challenge the norms of personal development and coaching. Today, I'm excited to share the second half of my very first conversation with Jon Atack, a renowned expert in the field of coercive influence and psychological manipulation. As a former Scientologist turned whistleblower, Jon has dedicated his career to exposing the hidden dynamics of authoritarian systems. His work as an author, expert witness, and educator has been instrumental in helping individuals to understand and navigate the complexities of high control environments. You can see why I was interested in meeting him. I wanted to understand that and how even in subtle forms that could happen easily. I really have enjoyed getting to know Jon. To listen to more of our conversations, you can head over to his channel, Jon Atack Family and Friends. It'll be linked in the show notes. Also, get his book, Opening Our Minds, a must read for anyone who wants to understand how they can be influenced in ways they don't expect. Enjoy the second half of our thought-provoking discussion. It will expand your understanding and hopefully inspire some change in the industry. That's really what we're all about here at Confronting the Line. That's why we're confronting it. Let's evolve the self-help and wellness industries to be just a little bit safer and more ethical for all of us, consumers and practitioners alike. Thanks for watching.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
What I'd like to do is to pick this conversation up, and I can ask you specific questions about Werner. There is one thing.
I want to know what you're finding in the answer to those questions you were just asking. That's so great.
Yeah. And if you go away and read Opening Our Minds and come back to me with questions from there, you're in exactly the position, where you understand this stuff as well as it can be.
Anybody who's become, I was talking to this academic who studies systems, and they said the only way to really see a system is to have totally surrendered to it and then get out of it. So I'm on the out of it side, but I'm a baby in that, right? I'm out. I mean, I've been 2020, they kicked me out. I would say I took myself out in the process of writing the book, because just because you physically leave doesn't mean you're mentally out, right? So it's a years and years process. It's not a instantaneous thing, but yeah.
But
because I'm seeing all the correlations you are too. I mean, any of us who have been a part of these groups and high control groups and then are now looking out in the world, we're freaking out in a way because we see all the same kind of telltale signs and mechanics. Like I see 100 responsibility as a way to subjugate people.
Really?
I'm sure we'll get some comments of people going, that's insane. No, it's not. That's our way out. No. It's a circle. It gives you an out for a minute. It gives you some power in some certain situations or circumstances to own the situation, of course. But then it brings you right back into this loop where you subjugate yourself to the same stuff.
And my fundamental question from leaving Scientology and the point where I left Scientology, I'd left the mother cult. I still believed for a few months. And then I left, went, no, I don't believe any of this. I will reconsider it one element at a time and decide how much of it to incorporate in my way of being. But you can't see it.
Reject it. Yeah, you have to get out.
And it's now 41 years later, and I've not taken any principle, every principle in Scientology that I investigated, and I've investigated most of them. There's a lot of it. I found out where they came from. I wrote a paper called Possible Origins for Dianetics and Scientology. And to my amazement, I analyzed 120 principles, found that Hubbard mentioned the source of them. So it wasn't a coincidence that he'd used them. And that the majority of them, to my surprise, came from Aleister Crowley.
Really?
Which was like, and along the way I found out, of course, that he was a Crowleyite magician. There's no doubt about that. He didn't deny it. He accepted it. He said, I broke up black magic in America. I was involved with it. He didn't, by the way, break it up. But the question that I got to is that I can give somebody absolute evidence that Ron Hubbard was a liar. Absolute evidence, because I can show them, here is where he says he was crippled and blind at the end of World War II. And here is where he says he beat up 3 petty officers on the 25th of July, 1945.
Yeah.
And the war ended on the 14th of August. Which one is true? I put this to somebody and they said, well, it's obvious he had two bodies. What of that? What is it about us that makes us so obdurate, so unwilling to think? So, Leah Remini in her wonderful book, Troublemaker, said, you can take the girl out of Scientology, but you can't take Scientology out of the girl. So I wrote to her. Before she did the Aftermath season, I sent her a copy of a piece of Blue Sky book about Scientology and said, you can take Scientology out of the girl. I spent 7 years after I left learning how to do this. I can do it in a day.
Yeah.
I don't charge money for it. If you want my help, it's amazed me. And I'm past that. I don't have the time or the energy. To be doing that kind of thing. I don't have any money either, which doesn't help tremendously. But they're finding out how to do it and realizing that people don't want to know.
No, they don't. That's right.
Breaking through that. There's something about Werner that I do want to say, which blew my mind. That is the description of him fracturing his skull as a child and how important that might be. Now, 10 years ago, I did a conference called Getting Clear, oddly enough, in Toronto, Getting Clear of Scientology. And this brilliant man, Yuval Laor, walked up to me and he said, last 20 years, I've been using your work in my work. I've done a doctorate called The Religious Ape about how belief, awe and fervor develop in human beings based on evolutionary premises in the modern view of evolution, which is not the Dawkins selfish gene, which is a rather horrible idea. It includes the idea of cultural transmission, that we can pass things on from one generation to the next, like language, for example, which are not hardwired. And so, he's been using my work 20 years. This is very nice, but he's not giving me any money. He's used Scientology as his model, and he's used my work as a way of looking at it. He said, did you ever wonder if Ron Hubbard was a temporal lobe epileptic? And I went, oddly enough, no, I didn't. I have heard of the condition, Dostoevsky syndrome. And he sat me down then and there with the 18 characteristics of the Bear-Fedio index. And if you have a majority of these, you are suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy. You won't have grand mal seizures. You might have a little bit of flickering of the eyes, and you might sometimes they'll throw out a limb. There'll just be some slight movement that indicates they're seized. Now, we found out at that conference, we found somebody who'd seen Hubbard lecturing who said, he'd do this thing where he'd suddenly move into this being this other person while he was speaking.
Interesting.
18 characteristics, and I'd like us to do this soon in the future.
Sure.
With Werner. What happens is you get a lesion in the temporal lobe, a scar, as an interruption to the process in the temporal lobe. And there are 18 characteristics. One of them is hypergraphia, the inability to stop writing. That I think logorrhea, not being able to stop talking comes into it as well. Ron Hubbard is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific writer of all time.
It's interesting. That's interesting.
Skull fracture, and there are 2 skull fractures that he suffers, could very well have induced temporal lobe epilepsy.
Interesting. I haven't, that's totally new. I mean, I'll have to,
I'll send you
this, because I read that book quite some time ago now, 10 or 15 years. I actually found it quite boring because I wanted to know more about the Werner story. And to me, it's like too much about the work, which was, I'm like, I don't need to, I've already mastered that. Like, I don't, in my leadership roles, I didn't care. And then it wasn't until way later when I find a reporter actually introduces me to outrageous betrayal. And then I was like blown away. But that was like in 2021. Werner's an interesting character, and he's very secretive, even though I was quite close to him and managed his quarters to an extent and whatnot, but he also kept me at a certain distance. I had a use that he was very clear about, and that was to make him a lot of money, build programs and make him money, and to put them on, and to help his vision to get into academia, right? Was what we were there for. That was my utility. And he was quite good with me, honestly. I mean, he would say to people, leave Anne alone, let her do whatever she wants. He knew. He and I had a couple of run-ins, which I share in the book, and a couple others where he kind of would threaten me. And I was like, well, I literally, curiosity is my thing, and I'm like, well, that's fascinating. When my brain unfreezes from the freeze, I kind of go into a sort of curiosity. Well, what was that about?
Yeah.
He's lazy in a very interesting way, this is why I think he has a cadre of staff around him. He always has somewhere between 6 to 10 people that are doing his almost incessant bidding. And then he has all these volunteers. So he has teams of people, for example, that read books for him. They read the book, and then they're given all these instructions about what to read for and how to, and then they give him cliff notes. Part of me wondered, this is one of the things like, why 10 steps to do that? I'm like, why don't you just subscribe to cliff notes? You know what I mean? Like, you don't need that. So, and in terms of, he doesn't write, but he spends, hundreds of hours when he's physically well enough on Zooms like this with teams of people picking through ideas, comma by comma, word by word. I sat in rooms for 9 years, 3 to 4 weeks a year watching this. It was a fascinating process. And that's, I don't know whether it's the same thing, but that's where I saw kind of the closest thing to what you're describing. I don't have any evidence or have never heard of him writing per se, but he has people that write for him.
It comes out as Logorrhea, the person who has to keep talking, has to dominate every conversation, isn't really very interested in what people are saying unless there is some money-making aspect to it they can grab hold of.
Because I went to many dinners with Werner, and then it got it was fun at first, and then it got kind of tedious. And then I would try to get like team people, why don't you go represent? And literally I couldn't sell a spot if I wanted to. What was tedious about it, besides the gratuitous amounts of alcohol that you had to figure out how to avoid if you were going to make it home, is he dominates the space. But then every once in a while you get into these little moments with him where it feels as if he's genuinely curious in you. And there was this one where he went around the table. I don't know what question he asked, but he was asking us some question. It was kind of like our origin story. And so I told mine, I said, well, funny, Werner, mine's not too unlike yours. It was a teen parent, which he wasn't exactly, but pretty close. He's had his first kid, I think, at 17 or 18.
Oh, yeah,
has 4 by the time he's like 21, 22. And so
he's horrible to his wife throughout.
Still to this day. And so but it was funny. And that was one of the few times when he was actually sort of listening, and he turned and looked at me, he goes, of course you are who you are. And I'm like, yeah, of course I am. Like I'd already been fully indoctrinated into the work of Landmark and already seen all the correlations that they use about, you say this to yourself when you're a child and that formulates your identity and blah, 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 blah. So, but mostly it's, him holding court, he has to be the center all the time. And if he isn't, he leaves. Like there was a situation one time we were in Bermuda, I think, and he was always late. This is the other thing for a guy who's all about integrity. I maybe could count the number of times he was actually on time to anything. And he comes in and we have people standing up and they're acknowledging what they've just gotten out of this 8-day being a leader course and this and that. And he was angry. He didn't realize I was standing right in front of him. He's right behind me. And I hear him saying to his wife, Hanukkah, this is fucking bullshit. And he's like spewing. And then I literally turn around, and I'm 5'11". He's about 6'4", but I'm tall. And I kind of turn around and look at him. See, I never had the sycophantry. I didn't have that. Yeah. He was always a human to me. He wasn't a god. And so I kind of looked around and I'm like, excuse me? I've just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars putting this on. These people are in a joyful state. What's your problem is what I'm thinking. And he just literally, you could see the screen come over him. You could see him straighten up and sit right, as it were. Like you could see him just shut whatever that just pure vitriol. You could see him turn it off and then just sort of stand. He's very poised, and his poise just came right back into place. But I got the message too, which was move this along. Because he was there now. The point of him coming was so that he didn't have to spend a bunch of time celebrating with these people. He wanted to have his 5 minutes to say his thing and then be gone. And then we would all go to dinner as the leaders. The small group and then we'd have our own debrief and celebration. That's all he ever wanted. He didn't want to be with the masses. He wanted to be with his cadre,
Yeah.
So,
Ron Hubbard had the Commodore's messengers who from 1968, 3 children, the Gillam family. He'd separated their mother from them. He'd separated their father from them. They're on a ship, a cattle ferry in the Mediterranean. And 2 sisters and a brother, become the first Commodore's messengers until the day he died. Which was 18 years later, 17 years later, he has a retinue always around him. And they will be much younger people their obedience must be absolute. They're meant to be able
Yep.
to, if he gives an order for them to relay to somebody else, they have to relay it in his tone of voice at the volume he relayed it. They shower him. He is completely looked after. And the deception, talking with
Exactly the same, by the way. Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't say a lot of detail in my book because I didn't want it to be a book about Werner. I wanted it to be a book about confronting your own, what I was dealing with, my own gullibility, my own, and the confusion of when
susceptibility.
My susceptibility, but also the cognitive dissonance between, but wait, this was really great, but was it? Like that kind of process, but exactly the same. His staff does absolutely everything for him. Like there's no aspect of his life that he is alone.
I mean, he made a bunch of little films, which the production costs were quite high on. None of them were published. We saw some previews and they were all canned, having spent, a year of his time with a great crew of people. I'd talked with various people who were on this project with him, and he'd have one of his messengers with the next cigarette because he was a chain smoker. He smoked 100 cigarettes a day, unfiltered cools. So he always, this one would go into the ashtray with one messenger and the next one would be ready because so he wouldn't have to breathe air.
That's so weird. I wonder if Werner adapted that because he saw it there. Because he isn't doing cigarette smoking, but the same thing, like every single thing is completely handled. That's fascinating.
Well, this again fits with temporal lobe epilepsy and with narcissistic personality disorder and the sociopathic, psychopathic traits. Microcontrol is an aspect that, every little thing has to be done in the right way.
Tell me what you think about this, if we just stay in that. So that gets translated in the organization that we know today as Landmark, right? So it starts with Werner Erhard and Associates, which puts on the S training, and then it, becomes, it's all the way through. But there's a whole aspect of the training that is about impeccability. In fact, I host these open talks a couple times a month with people just to come on and ask questions and talk, those that are interested in deconstructing what really happened to us in our time there. And we were talking about this last week, this whole idea of impeccability. So when you walk into a Landmark, how this gets played out in a culture, in an organization that puts on a training, that is training people in that training, you walk into a Landmark form room, the chairs are put together in an exact way. A tissue box is used to make sure each one is spaced exactly that part, and it has to be impeccable. And the storyline is, or the narrative is that you're learning how to create an environment in which there's different people have slightly different ones. The one somebody was expressing last week was absolutely no distraction. There's nothing. And then somebody else on the call was really great because they said, well, then why didn't they use the staggered chair thing? Why are the chairs lined up like militarily? So when you're sitting in one chair, you're looking at the back of the head of the person in front of you. Why didn't they do the staggering thing if it was all about no distraction? But there's all this lore and justification for what occurs to me as very OCD ill behavior gets turned into processes that get put into trainings that are out to produce an extraordinary human being. But when I trace it back, because I got to the center, I'm like, I think this all comes out of one guy's illness. I think that this, and then we create value, those of us that come later and don't know any of that, and we're doing these practices and these processes, we create these narratives, these stories that provide value for us.
Yeah, you are.
It's not that it has value. It's that I'm creating value out of shit, which that's what human beings do.
You're so absolutely right. If you look at Hubbard or Rajneesh, they both had scent phobias. And this was so extreme with Hubbard. And this is not something that was generally known by Scientologists. But if you join the C organization, then you do something called the hygiene hat, the training in hygiene. And this says you're not allowed to use any scented products. You can't use scented shampoo. You can't, because Hubbard, when his rooms were painted, he had to have odor-free paint. He had it was something. Rajneesh had sniffers. You couldn't go into the room until you'd been sniffed to see if you smelled bad. And it's a hypersensitivity. You get in Williams syndrome where it affects the hearing, and people with Williams syndrome can hear a whisper half a mile away. You get these exaggerated sensors in certain conditions, and it would seem this is one of them. That then is passed down. It becomes to the extreme, and only known to a very few people in Scientology around her, but that the psychiatrists, the evil psychiatrists who tried to have him locked up, who are in a great conspiracy against life, the universe, and everything. Anybody with the term psychotherapist, psychologist, he said this, so it must be true. But they are trying to control the universe using rose perfume. So you get into an obsessive behavior, as you say, that is a part of the dysfunction, disorder, illness of the guru. Yeah. And it is then expressed outwards so that we all have to do this. And if we do this, it's the right thing. There was a guy called Flavell Yeakley, who was head of one of the personality testing organizations in the US. And he was asked by Kip McKean at the Boston Church of Christ to come and personality test 900 of his people because he was offended that somebody, probably my friend Steve Hassan, had said he was running a cult. And he didn't like this idea. So he said, look, you're a personality guy, come and test them. And Yeakley came away and said, they've all got the same personality. If you ask them, what was your personality 5 years ago? What is it now? Was it in 5 years' time? What do you want it to be? In 5 years' time, it would all be the same. And it's Myers-Briggs. It's not really scientific, but there are 16 types. He then went and tested Scientologists, people from the Way International, people from the Moonies, and people from regular Christian confessions. And the regular Christians had all sorts of different personality types. But with each group, he found there was a specific personality type, which is cloning. That's what he called it. And it's cloning of what's projected by the leader as what the leader pretends to be.
Right.
That people are desperately trying to imitate the leader. And that would include, with Scientologists, smoking cigarettes, for example. It would include it was okay to drink alcohol, but no other drug. They're still, I think, running campaigns against cannabis in the US, despite the fact that medically the evidence against alcohol is a little bit more severe than the evidence against cannabis.
Well, that's funny because alcoholism is pretty rampant in the higher levels of Landmark, and I can tell you, Werner's an excessive drinker, or was in my time that I was buying his alcohol. So, in fact, I had to learn. My mentor had spent time with him early on. One of my early teachers is actually a wonderful woman. She's passed on now, but who spent time with him in the early days. And she was sort of the consummate Connecticut lady. I knew with her that I would always, because I spent a lot of time with her, she trained me a lot early on, and she would always get a glass of Chardonnay. She wanted a martini, which is Werner's main drink, a martini and a glass of Chardonnay and a cup of ice. And I didn't ever really understand that at all until fast forward years later, and I'm going to all these dinners with Werner, and I call her up and I say, my God, what are you doing with all, because they'll order, and Mike was quite a wino as well. He loved wine. I wouldn't say he was an alcoholic to that degree, but he really loved wines. You'd sit down, everybody had to have a martini, and then you'd have a red and a white, 2 or 3 of them. And I'm like, this is like 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. I got to get up at 6 in the morning, run a team, get ready for the course. And in the early days in 2012, like when I was first hosting the program, these were almost every night. Eventually it tapers off to be 3 or 4 during a, 20-day period. But anyway, so I call her up and I said, I don't know what to do. And she goes, Anne, what do you think the glass of ice was for? She would slide ice into the martini and the Chardonnay so that her glass wouldn't get refilled. And I'm like, oh my God, that's genius. So I started ordering a glass of ice when I would go to the dinner so that I could get away with having only one drink. Because as soon as the nanosecond your drink goes down, he's ordering you more. Oh, fill them up and all that stuff. I was also in charge of the budget. So I used that as a bit of a hammer to try and control things. I'd be like, I learned you couldn't say no. You can't say no to people like this. You cannot say no to narcissists in anybody on the narcissism spectrum. You cannot say no to them. You can't confront them. But I got really good at, yes, and that will cost the charitable initiative we're all here raising money for. That's, I would say, the EJI, the Erhard Jensen Initiative. That will cost it $600. That will cost it, because the money we spent was money that wasn't going to that, which was the reason we were supposedly having these courses, was to raise money to put into that organization, which would then use that money to train. This was the story, to train university lecturers and professors to deliver this unique, new, cutting-edge ontological approach to leadership in institutions of higher education. That was the whole. So I would say, yes, of course we can do that. And I just want to let everybody know that means this much less money as the contribution in the end. And that was how I would manage them.
Yeah, the brief time that I spent in a Zen monastery when I was 18, when I learned Zazen, I had the great good fortune to have a conversation with the abbot there. The Zen sect actually now deny he ever existed, which tells you how cults are these days.
Wow.
To the website for Throsselhold Priory, the first abbot was some guy I've never heard of. Diogenes Strathern was the first abbot. And he said to me, he said some very clever things before he defected to the Tibetans. One of them was that if you join a group, consider the least person in it and see if they have qualities that you wish to have. And I was able to invert that and kind of go, well, consider the most person in it, the leader. Is this the sort of person I'd like to be? And it sounds to me as if Werner Hubbard and Werner Erhard were both alcoholics. And that's not ever been one of my aspirations, to become the slave of any drug. And the thought that somebody who's developed this, like I say with Hubbard, 100 cigarettes a day. And this, the story I was going to tell you, he'd have, making these little films, he'd have 3 messengers with him, one with the cigarette and the lighter ready for the next, one with the ashtray and one with the chair. And one day, the one with the chair, when he went to sit down, didn't have the chair in place, and he fell to the ground. That person was then put onto the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is a gulag, a labor force, a prison camp, where you usually serve a sentence of 2 years. 2 years for not putting the chair there.
In Werner world, they would have been called for a pay refund. Well, they would have been screamed at and very possibly physically harmed, but they would, pay refund. And there were people that on his staff that at the end of their month, they would owe him more money than he owed them, so to speak. And I'm saying that lightly to be clear. He didn't he does not own anything, pay anybody. His name is not to anything. It's all done through shell corporations and people like me, honestly. That's why he needed me, in part, because I ran all the money. I did everything for that whole project, all ran through my company and was on, me. And he relied on my integrity and my commitment to the work to ensure that the portion that belonged to them got transferred to them. One of my proud moments is in the end, I did stiff him for about $30,000 worth of expenses that I refused to pay. I didn't refuse to pay it for anything other than the fact I didn't have the money. I mean, I don't want to sound like some great rebeller here. I actually was literally like, I was pretty disgusted by that point, but I was also like, I don't even have that money. We did not make that. You did not come to the program. I mean, it was a whole thing. But to this now, I'm kind of like, at least I got him that $30,000, like that of expenses I didn't pay, and that they purported to have spent. But everything is organized. But there's this interesting thing that happens. It's interesting what you're saying, because if I came along in the 90s, and I come into Landmark, I don't know a word about Werner. He does not exist. He has been erased at that point. And then I become a trainer of the main level of initial leadership training. It was called the Introduction to Foreign Leaders Training. It became Introduction Leaders Training. Now it's called the Leadership Academy. Even then, the only way I knew about Werner was because it was in the corporate Q&A. If somebody in your guest room asked you, is this a derivative of est? Is Werner Erhard? You had a whole thing that you said, which was basically no. I mean, yes, the ideas, the employees, Werner sold his ideas to the employees, which we would all disregard that the employees meant his brother and sister. And we never did any thinking about that correlation, but as well as a few others. And he was completely gone. But what I now know is like they had a project to like recreate the training or whatnot. There's always been running the project to recreate Werner. And if you pressed in on some of the higher ups that are in there now running the organization, if you really pressed them or they were pissed off at you, one of the things you would hear from them is essentially, I am the closest thing to Werner you're ever going to fucking get. And if you don't, they would evoke him. And it's very clear that they have worked their entire career and lives to be him. And they don't see that as mind control. They don't see that as brainwashing. They see that as a recreating source, which is my latest word I'm now on a rampage against. But is this whole idea of source, this bullshit.
Which is borrowed directly from Ron Hubbard.
Is it?
Yeah.
Every time I talk to Scientology, you and Chris, I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, no, that's the insistence today, is that you call him and that you acknowledge source. You have to acknowledge source. I asked Steve Zaffron, the great Steve, who just passed away recently, actually this last April, longtime Werner colleague and conciliatory and, all that, head of the business division that Landmark created called Vanto. And it was Landmark Education Business Development, then it was Vanto. Really funny guy. I actually loved Steve, had a great time with Steve. I've now since learned some upsetting facts about Steve. And I'll be honest, it hasn't diminished my love for him because he and I just had a lot of fun. But I asked him one time on our very last, it was the end of the last course. We're in Cancun. We're sitting around, we're drinking wine. We're getting ready to go to dinner. And I said to him, a friend of mine was there. I said, I just don't understand this source thing. Like, why does it really matter to acknowledge source? And wine, comes flying, because he had just taken a sip of wine, comes flying out of his mouth. And he was literally speechless. And Steve is, in my experience, a very smart man. I didn't know at that time that he had been with Werner since the very beginning. I would find that out much later. And then he goes on and he said a whole bunch of stuff to me that I couldn't even begin to recreate, because it didn't make any sense. Like, he never really answered the question. He was just like, well, because it's the source. I'm like, yeah, but so what? Like, I don't understand. Why does that matter? I mean, even I grew up as a Christian, and the kind of Christian I grew up as is Jesus is your friend. Jesus loves you, don't you know? And like, you are Jesus, Jesus is you. There wasn't an idolatry kind of aspect to it. So I just didn't have that. So I never really could quite get it. And I do say in my book that you are the source of your own transformation. I'm actually even changing my mind on that a little bit and saying, maybe not. You are you execute actions based in your new insights and perceptions. I don't know that we're the source of anything. I don't know that I want to be, actually.
No.
No, it sounds terrible.
It's megalomania, pure and simple. And it's like Hubbard, who would say, that every major idea in Scientology derived from him. Any other suggestion was minor. And then you go back to his original books, where he gives lists of the people that he took ideas from. And so there's a little bit of a contradiction.
It's happening in the Bartlett book, right? Because in Bartlett, he's still saying...
He just lists one thing after another that he stole some idea from. The thing that it really stopped me, because I have a background in Zen Buddhism, I do have quite some understanding of Zen Buddhism. He doesn't. He's just somebody very much like Ron Hubbard. They get the Reader's Digest boys book of something, and they're now the great expert on it.
Yeah.
And they don't, it's all about him. It's all about him trying to overcome his sickness, which he never did. He was a horrible, manipulative, controlling man. And he learned how to become a more horrible, more controlling and more manipulative man. So, the stories about money and the waste of money. You've got the Hunger Project, and you've got money that should be going into that. And it's instead feeding Werner's hunger for...
It was an enrollment machine. For him, the whole thing was an enrollment machine to get people to do the training. That's what it really was. He put people on the corners with this. That's what to me, it's the beginning of sort of weaponized empathy, like where you get people who are doing good work. So you look good and you're going to ride those coattails. We see this all over. I've been listening to a lot of Ezra Klein lately. We see this all over the...
I was watching Ezra Klein last night, actually.
Yeah. I'm listening to his book Abundance just came out. But I really appreciate the way that he and some others are sort of talking about in the liberalism and like how we have weaponized empathy there as well to get people on board to act or behave a certain way. Like, oh, this is the good side. I mean, look, and come on, joke's on us. All the Teslas, right? Everybody's buying the Teslas because the Teslas are going to save the planet. And they're the best EV car and it's the future. And Elon Musk is a dreamer. Elon Musk has purchased everything. He has not thought anything up. Anybody who knows this. So, and now all of a sudden, I mean, I think it's kind of hilarious. I have friends that own Teslas. They're decent cars. I mean, it's nice, whatever. And they're now all running around the United States buying stickers. I'm not with him either. I'm stuck with this Tesla. Like they're trying to, but
I can't sell this damn thing.
People think that he switched sides, but he didn't switch sides. It's the same.
Nothing changed.
Nothing changed. We just don't see it. We don't see that our desire to do good, our desire to do something that we have no real access to at the level of individual. How am I going to stop global warming? Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to, stop buying straws, less plastic, get an EV, those are good things. But then we turn it into a kind of religion. We turn it into this badge of honor rather than like, wow, well, I didn't really know what to do. And I want to be a better person than I was before. And I want to do the actions that are, to the best of my understanding, going to help our planet and our society. But these predators weaponize that. They find ways to use that to take advantage of us, to use the power of the groups, in order to, win over their ideas. It's just the same thing.
We get greenwashing and I mean, a friend of mine worked for Friends of the Earth, and I admire Friends of the Earth. He was taught selling techniques. He was taught how to get onto somebody's doorstep and get them to buy something. And you're kind of going, You got to walk the walk. You know, if you believe these things, this is the way you have to behave. And we're sold on all sorts of great ideas. You know, I've been recycling paper since 1984, but I know most of it's burned.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
And I know that many of the plastic is ending up on beaches in Turkey or
Right.
dumped somewhere
in Peru or something.
We're being sold these ideas by unscrupulous people who aim to be powerful, who want to have sway over us. And it's why, you know, politics becomes a cult. And it is that thing. Why are we unwilling to face reality? Because when I came to face reality, to the extent that I've managed to do that, it was a lot less scary than I'd imagined.
Yeah.
You know, the thought of dying really wasn't that scary. In fact, coming from Buddhism, of course, you find that you're not going to die. The fear of the eternal return, the wheel of suffering and all of that. But these scary ideas, we can actually do things well and we can do things properly, and we are failing. You know, for me, the most significant aspect of our culture is our education system. The fact that our education system is authoritarian. It is training people to want to rape the world and master everybody around them, as if that was a, you know, natural thing. It's not training people to be responsible and caring. Of course, there are hundreds of schools that are exceptions to this. But, you know, I set about trying to design a program for schools that would teach kids what fake news is and how to tell what to do. And I've seen what Google and people have put up on this matter, and it's like, oh yeah, really, whose side are you on? It is usually relatively easy to spot a lie. Kids are not taught that. They're not taught how to communicate. They're not taught how to make relationships. They're not taught how to mend things. They're not taught that resentment and revenge are very bad ideas, not just for the person you're doing it to, but for you being consumed by those things. And they may then be taught some wishy-washy idea of empathy. They're meant to have empathy. And again,
over here, I'm pretty sure they're not taught that at all. I had yesterday, I had somebody on Facebook put out it was a link to an article, and the page was some movie star person in a glitzy, silky dress, kind of walking, and then behind them is all these like tattooed up. So it's supposed to be Venezuelan gang members, right? Now, not even a 1 second glance at this photo, you can tell that it's photoshopped, because there's no way that a movie star in a glitzy dress is standing in a room with a bunch of tattooed up gang members, right? A white woman, by the way, it's a white blonde woman. And I just said right off, like, this, I don't even have to click into this article. And the headline was bullshit, you know, too. Like, it was just obvious because it doesn't match with common sense. Like I always, it's like common sense is our best friend. And so anyway, but I put something back. I said, this is propaganda. This is not real. This is not real. This is not, that picture is not real. The story is not real. Nothing about this is real. And I was quite shocked by the response from the person who was a former student of mine on my teams. Good guy, good person with a big heart. And he goes, well, of course the picture's not real, but the thought behind it is that liberals are advocating for Venezuelan gang members in our society. I know a lot of liberals, and there's not a single one advocating for that. So I'm like, you are spreading propaganda and being manipulated. I just said it because I wanted to see what would happen. You're being manipulated. And literally, this very smart person says, well, I know that the image is fake and this is fake and whatever, but the idea isn't. That was startling to me. I was like, but if the image is fake and we know that the story is fake, then why is the idea not fake?
Why is it wrong for a police officer to decide that somebody's guilty and plant drugs on them? Because obviously they're guilty because the police officer has a sixth sense, as we all know.
But see, this to me isn't any different than the people who look over at the Hubbards or the Werners or the whatever and go, okay, got it. So he's a domestic abuser and a alcoholic and a da-da-da-da-da, and, you know, whatever. I mean, look at Trump, all of them. And we insist on our projection rather than what we're seeing, even when it's obvious. And that is just startling to me. And I just keep coming back to the human brain can handle about anything except for being wrong. As soon as we have to confront that we're wrong, I don't know, we go insane.
Yeah, it is amazing. You know, cognitive dissonance, the confirmation bias, the sense, also the fundamental attribution error, the idea that, you know, if you turn up late, it's because you're deliberately being late. If I turn up late, it's because the traffic was bad, that we see others through a different lens to ourselves. And there is so much that we could be teaching our kids. I would absolutely start with my friend Ari Chalef's book, Intelligent Disobedience. Teach kids that they can say no. Teach kids that it's good to ask questions,
Right.
Stuff that's like, it's about obedience training rather than being about self-empowerment, these awful.
Well, and these groups also
teach.
I thought that I was trained in critical thinking by Landmark. And here's how my critical training went. Set aside everything that you know and be open to what we're telling you. I thought that was critical thinking. It wasn't until way later, I'm listening to Serendipity had a great guest on whose name I apologize, I can't remember right now, who wrote a book about how to raise critical thinking children. And she's going through it and I'm like, whoa, okay. As soon as somebody asks me to put aside my thinking, I'm not critical thinking. I've now surrendered any kind of thinking. And that is starting to pull that back. And then I just go to, look, I'm a girl who got pregnant when she was 15, dropped out of school as a sophomore year, and, has then spent my life, been fortunate enough to spend my life with a lot of really, really, really smart people and read a lot of books and lived a lot of life. I have a master's in life and survival in that way. Mike Jensen asked me one time, they were all telling their college stories, and he turns to me, we're at dinner. Werner wasn't at this one, so it was fun. We were all sitting around talking, and he says, so where were you educated, Anne? And I said, life. And I told him, I said, I had to leave school in the 9th grade and I was a single mom living on my own since I was 16 and stuff. So after that, he would always introduce me. He goes, I'm the economist. She's the one who actually knows business. She's the one who actually knows how to make something work. I know how to think about it. She knows how to actually do it. And that he would introduce me like that all the time after that. Because he looked at me, he goes, oh, you sure as hell got educated somewhere. I said, yeah, life and books and hanging out. Blessed to spend a lot of time with people like you and discuss these things. And that's some of it's I miss that I didn't get to go to formal school.
Let's go on the record. I dropped out of school at 17.
Did you? Awesome.
Education came from too.
Yeah.
And critical thinking, our friend Chris Shelton has pushed the idea of critical thinking, and he and I have butted heads over this from time to time. Because he was on a podcast and he said that critical thinking is the cure for cults. And I went, no, it isn't. And it bothered him. And we did a show together where I kind of went, well, I'm going to concede.
I have to go look this show up. I want to hear this conversation.
To be fair, it had distressed him so much that I had to be conciliatory. And the reality in John Hunter's book here,
yes, yeah.
He has a very good quotation from the philosopher mathematician Bertrand Russell. He says, when the intensity of emotional conviction subsides, a man who is in the habit of reasoning will search for logical grounds in favor of the belief which he finds in himself. I've long said we use our intelligence to buttress our stupidity. 10 years ago now, I founded a thing called the Open Minds Foundation with the idea of trying to teach people how their reasoning is bypassed. Because to me, that's the important thing. By the time I was 19, I could argue the hind legs off Socrates, but I got recruited into Scientology.
Right.
And I then used that, whatever that acuity
That's
is.
what this lie that smart people don't fall for this stuff. It's quite the opposite. I mean, it certainly is in the Landmark world. That world is full of some of the smartest people, great leaders. There's information, I think as Werner passes here and more people start to speak up, because my book came out and they didn't kill me or get me. I haven't been sued.
I did get sued actually, but
yeah, I'm not asking for that. Thank you very much. No. But so people are like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's okay. And it's okay to talk. And we're going to find out. Smarts, if anything, lines you up for this almost, because you do think, in my view, you think that your thinking, your reason, your intelligence is somehow protective against manipulation. No, that's what's used to manipulate you, in my view. Like that's as well as your emotions, so then we have the whole side, oh, well, it's just how I feel. Well, that's really ripe for manipulation. The bottom line where I've come to is, I now walk through the world going, wow, I wonder who's manipulating me about what now? Like, how is that? And it's almost a game I play. And the most useful question I found is who's benefiting? Yeah. Who's benefiting from this thing I don't care whether it's trying to get me to buy a product or whatever, who's benefiting? And let me kind of look at that a little bit and see. And if I'm going to benefit too, I might enter into the transaction, but I'm not going to pretend to myself that I haven't been coerced in some way, shape, or form, probably. So
yeah, and I think fundamentally understanding what persuasion, what manipulation is, and differentiating. I 30 years ago set out on a project to say what is ethical persuasion, what is unethical persuasion, where are the boundaries? And the problem that I had was that wherever I looked, I was seeing unethical persuasion. I wasn't seeing, here are all of the facts for you to consider before you become involved or buy this product. Here's everything that's known about it. You know, people want to sell you an idea or a product. They want to sell you an idea or a product. I had
that's fascinating.
This guy came to sell my aged mother an adjustable bed, and he gave her the whole 20-minute spiel. And I sat there, and he said, "So do you want to buy it?" My mum said, "Oh, that'd be up to my son." You know, my mum was in her 80s by this time. And he delivered exactly the same 20-minute spiel. I couldn't believe that it was that crass, that verbatim. He'd got this script. By the time we'd finished talking, he was in tears, because by the time we'd finished talking and I'd said, "So, you know, who do you rely on?" And he said Napoleon Hill. And I'm kind of, "Oh, that's really old school. That's 50s. Read Cialdini, read this, read that."
Right.
And then he was trying to say, you know, but I go back and see the old ladies that I've talked into buying this thing. And I just looked at him and said, "You know, I can buy this product for half the price. You're getting the other half. I know this." And he started crying. It was like, yeah, I've been conning people.
Well, why not? Because I'm doing a little workshop called Safe Practitioner Workshop, and this is kind of in partnership with the Seek Safely, and for the benefit of, we contribute. I'm trying to help them raise money.
I personally have given up on that, raising money.
Well, it's interesting. I know. I hear you. And so, especially ethically. And so it's been very interesting to have all these conversations. So I've been in the question, like, can we make the safe and ethical practice of personal development and wellness a market advantage? But already there's people that are going to take advantage of that, because they're going to claim that they're going to get the advantage of that without actually having the practices. So it's been interesting doing this workshop, because the first one I had like 46 people in, and they were from all kinds of disciplines, plant medicine, which is the whole new frontier, all kinds of stuff. There was one gal in there who was a lawyer for a particular state, and her job was to come up with guidelines. They were trying to introduce bills to start to have some management, some control around the plant medicine field and this and that. And it's been it's really interesting discussions as we try to look at that. And transparency, the closest thing we can come up with is being as transparent as possible. But I'm just dealing with simple stuff like, just be transparent about the price you're actually charging. Just start there. Like, don't make me click 15 things in to know how much something costs. And then stop with poor Cialdini. Has anybody interviewed him about how he feels about how his work has been used? I mean, I love his book, Influence. It's amazing. And it's been I know people who teach from that book to teach transactionalism and basically how to use those principles to manipulate people. I've been in sales all my life. You just go out and say, "Look, here's the deal. If you buy this, I get a commission. The store gets this, da-da-da-da-da. And what I want to know in this transaction is, do you need this? Is this useful for you? Are you going to get your quarter? Are you going to get your chunk of the value of this transaction?" That's the closest thing I've come up with as ethical transacting.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Cialdini himself, I mean, it's 40 years now since that book came out. Persuasion is also really interesting. When I got it, there's this thing about, you know, you get a big book and that's you know, going to be worth more. And I'm kind of looking at this book and going, this has got the same number of pages in it as my book, and it's twice as big because it's on crap paper and, you know, way too many reference notes. But I was on a plane in the 90s, flying to America, and in the in-flight magazine there was an ad for a course that Bob was doing, and on the course you would learn for your $500 a secret, and it was like, okay.
No,
let's get with it, you know. But as he said, you know, it can be used for good or evil. And if you're going to make some money from it, then you have to use it for evil. It has to be corporate. It has to be about that. Anyway, this has been incredible. And we could sit here for the next 15
hours.
years.
I was just thinking that. I was like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And
let's
I'll come back anytime.
Thank everybody for spending their time with us. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I think we're going to be doing this again very soon because it was so much fun.
It is. I'm going to read your book that you sent me. Thank you for that. And I look forward to it. And there's a whole, but I can hear your interest in Werner. I'm going to send you some stuff. And there's a bunch, there's more coming, I think, as he nears the end of his time. And as we have the freedom to start to explore. I always say we've spent 50 years exploring the good side of whatever he created around him. Well, we now need to dedicate a little bit of time to the intended or unintended consequences that maybe are dangerous so that we don't carry those forward. That's my fundamental desire. So
the evil that men do lives after them.
Right.
Good is oft interred within their bones.
Mm.
As Billy Shakespeare put it. If there was indeed a Billy Shakespeare, let's...
I know,
let's not even go there.
Right.
This has been great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Switch off our little recordings.